You are listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast, a podcast for Shopify store owners that brings you concrete examples on how to build and grow your e-commerce business. My name is Scott Austin, and I have an e-commerce agency named Jade Puma. In this podcast, I'll share my e-commerce insights and best practices with you. Hey folks, before we dig into this episode, I want to tell you about a new service that I'm offering. It's a store audit where I sit down and record my impressions in a video of your store and brand and provide recommendations on improvements you can take. Clients have been telling me how useful these audits are in building out and prioritizing their to-do list. If you're interested, click on the link in the show notes to learn more. You'll see actual audits that I've done so you'll know exactly what you'll get. Now, on to our episode. Hey, Scott Austin here. This episode has an accompanying video, so if you are listening to the audio version and are a more visual type of person, check the show notes for the link to the video. In the past on this podcast, I've done episodes where I cover the recent software changes to the Shopify platform, and Shopify is always improving their platform. This summer, Shopify did another big release for their platform, but I didn't do a podcast on them, and that's because these releases are getting so large that it's hard to get your head around all the improvements. It just becomes a list of features. And understanding how to leverage those features for your business is hard in the abstract. So for this episode, I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to show you how you can implement powerful filters on your collection pages and in search using nothing but free Shopify tools. Most of what I'm going to show you wasn't even possible a couple of years ago. And some of the key pieces didn't become available until this summer's release. And what we'll be doing is bringing together a bunch of different pieces in the Shopify platform that have been evolving for the past few years. And I'm confident that the Shopify dev team has been planning this evolution for quite some time. You don't fit these very separate pieces together as elegantly as we're going to see by accident. This is done by design. So kudos to the Shopify dev team for having a vision of where they wanted to go and the discipline to execute on that vision over years across multiple teams. I worked at Microsoft for 12 years, and pulling this off is not easy. So let's dig in. The goal of what we're going to do for the customer experience is to have collections and search pages have filters. And those filters will help customers find the products that are the right ones for them. To do that, we're going to need to define what we want for filters and then enrich the product data with the data needed for the filters. To get started, you're going to need two apps in your store. They are both free apps made by Shopify. The first app is Search and Discovery. It's been around for a couple of years and it keeps getting better. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. The second app is Shopify Flow. Flow has been around for quite a while, but has recently been made available to all Shopify plans. It's a super useful app that all stores can benefit from. Now, for this podcast, I'm going to be demoing what we're building in a store that I'm working on with a client right now called Chama Valley Meat Co. And they sell meat. They have different types of meat like yak, beef, and lamb. And they have some features around their meat that that customers are looking for when they're shopping. So I started putting together filters for their store, and I started seeing all these pieces coming together, and it was much easier for me to do this with just free Shopify tools than it ever had been before. And I really got super excited and kind of geeked out about it. So here's how I put it all together in a much tighter, more formal way than I've ever been able to do before. In the Chama Valley Meat Store, we're using the Flex theme. And the Flex theme, like all themes these days, any online store 2.0 theme, supports what's called faceted filtering. So what I had to do was go into the theme and go to the collection pages template and add in the functionality or turn on the features for faceted filtering. And that was just done by adding a block to the section for collections for faceted filtering. And then when I had that on in this theme, I also had to turn on sidebar, which is a setting at the collection level for showing the sidebar. And the faceted filtering shows up inside the sidebar. Now, faceted filtering is connected to the Shopify Search and Discovery app. So all I did inside the theme was say, hey, we're going to be using information from the Search and Discovery app. And then I could get out of the theme, and the rest of the work was done inside of the other apps in the Shopify admin itself, not inside of the theme. Now, when you're building out filters, you have to know what it is you want to be filtering on and what are the options going to be for that filter. So in this example, I just want to show you one filter that I made and how I made it. And that filter is for meat. Now, in this store, we have 3 types of meat: beef, lamb, and yak. So I want a filter that allows the customer to say, well, I'm looking for yak, and they can select the yak filter and only see yak products. Or they could change that out and search for just beef, or multiple of those. Right? So to start, when you're making a filter, you got to know what it is you want to filter on and what the options are going to be. Right? You have to be very explicit about it, and I call it defining your taxonomy. So you want to define your taxonomy and say, I'm going to have a filter for meat. And meat is allowed to have 3 options: beef, lamb, and yak. So you don't want someone to spell it differently. Lamb could be spelled with a capital A or a small a, or lamb could alternatively be called mutton. You don't want to get confusing like that. You want to be very explicit, very consistent, so that when you present those options to your customer, they're presented the same way every time, and there's only 3 of them if 3 is the number of options you're going to have. And the way that we now do that is with meta fields. So in the Shopify admin, you get to meta fields by going to settings and then down to custom data, and you'll see a whole list of meta fields that you can create. You can have meta fields for products, variants, collections, customers, and a whole bunch of other types of entities. Now on a collection page and a search page, right, they're both showing products, so we're looking at product meta fields. So if you select on the product meta fields, you get to create what's called a meta field definition. And this is super, super powerful. It's only been around for a couple of years, and every Shopify release, it gets a little bit better every single time. So like some of the stuff we're going to show you here wasn't possible even just a year ago. What I did for this Chama Valley Meat Co. store is I created a meta field definition for meat. And I defined that meta field to allow 3 different options. So it's basically, you'll have a pull-down menu. You basically say, this one is going to have a limited set of choices, and you define what those choices are going to be. And I put in three items: beef, lamb, and yak. So now, when I go to a product page inside of the Shopify admin, at the bottom of that product page, once you define your meta field and pin that meta field, it's called, down at the bottom of the product page, you'll see your meta fields. And once I said, well, this meat meta field only has 3 values that are allowed, if I click on the box to enter in the meta field, I actually have a pull down where I can select from those predefined ones: beef, lamb, and yak. Now let's say for whatever reason we want to change lamb to mutton. Well, we just go back to that meta field definition and change the word lamb to mutton, and that data gets expanded out across the whole product catalog, and all the products get updated with it. And this is the way that you can make your experience on the filter side really consistent. So somebody might be kind of lazy with their capitalizations, and you have a capital B for beef. Well, they're not typing in the word beef and having to select capital B. They're just selecting from the pull-down menu the word beef that is already capitalized. So meta field definitions and pre-selected or pre-assigned meta fields where they've got to select from the values is a great way to A, let your store staff know what the options are, and B, make sure that they enter them in a consistent way every time so the filters are nice and tight and consistent. So now that we have a meta field definition that has all the options we want for this filter, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our search and discovery app. Remember I said that's the free app by Shopify. And we want to, in our filtering group, add that option for that filter. Now, the nice thing in the search and discovery app is you can add different types of filters. So you could filter on things like product type. You could filter on tags. You could filter on different product options or variants that they have. And you can also filter on meta fields. Now, in the old days, we would filter on tags a lot for things. In the search app, when you filter on tags, you really can't say, I want a subset of tags, just these 5 kind of thing. And that's where the meta fields become more and more powerful. is you can now say, well, we're going to look at this one meta field, and this meta field is only for this data value. Where with tags, there's no structure behind tags. But in meta fields, you can have like 10 different meta fields for 10 different buckets of data that you want to store. And you can say this bucket is only for these elements. So it doesn't get confused on what this data is for. So tags were a workaround we did before meta fields were as rich and abundant as they are now. But as I build out stores today, I don't use tags for filters anymore like I used to. And when you did that, you used to have to use an app like the Boost Search and Filter app, which is still a great app, and stores with large catalogs are still going to use that. But now small stores can get that rich filtering experience with these free apps instead of having to implement a paid app, which is also, takes a little bit of time to implement. So we're creating this filter in the Search and Discovery app, and we're using the meta field that we defined already for meat, and just saying, I want to add meat as one of the filters to the store. And then once you do that, as soon as you go out to the front end of the website, because remember, we've added our faceted filtering to our theme, we've defined our meta field definition, we've gone and updated our meta field definition, and I'm going to show you some tricks to do that more easily and more scalable in a second. Once you add that data to all your products, you'll just start seeing it show up automatically in your customer experience on the search and collection pages. Now, when I did it in this store for Chama Valley Meat, what they had for all of their products, they didn't have tags for any of this, but what they did have was they had in the product title, the type of meat was listed every single time. So if it was ground yak, the title actually said ground and yak. Ground beef said ground beef. So what I was able to do, the other app that I talked about, Shopify Flow, I used Shopify Flow to go in and look at all the existing products and say, all right, if it has the word beef in the title, let's set that meta field value to beef. If it has yak in the title, let's set the meta field value to yak. So by setting this up, I was able to define this Shopify Flow procedure and then just execute it, and it went through all the products in the store and automatically populated the meta field values instead of me going and doing it manually step by step. Now, I did have some products that were both yak and beef, and I had to set up a rule that said if both yak and beef exist in the product title, then give it the meta field value for both of those things. So in Shopify Flow, I set up, they're called flows, and I set one for setting the meat meta field. Now, you have to have a trigger for doing this. So you just can't set up a flow and say, go execute this on my whole catalog. So what I did for the trigger is I made the trigger product status updated. So once I set up the flow with all the rules that I wanted, I changed all my products to draft, and then immediately after, changed it back to active. So it went and changed the product status, and that kicked off the trigger, and Shopify Flow went through all the products and went through the flow's rules and said, oh, this one has beef in the product title, therefore we're going to assign beef as the meta field value. Now, one of the confusing things about setting up a flow that wasn't that well documented for me, it's easy if you just have an open meta field where you can put any text string in that you want. But remember, in this case, we've defined our meta field to only allow 3 options. And you can allow, one, you could have just beef, or it can be beef and yak, or it could be beef and yak and lamb. That is actually stored inside of the Shopify data set as a matrix, right? So you don't just put a text string of beef in, So my rule doesn't say if the product title contains beef, set the meta field value to beef. It would be nice if it was that simple. But when you're doing the multiple items options, the hard defined, hard coded, these are the only options you're allowed for this meta field, it's then stored as a matrix. And the way that looks, and there's a box that says what is the value for that meta field going to be, instead of just putting in the word beef or the word yak, you actually put in an open square bracket, which is code for this is an array or a set of choices. And even if you only have one value in that, you're going to put in that open bracket and then quotation mark and then the text string beef, end quotation mark, and then end square bracket. Now, if you're going to put in more than one value, you're actually going to have one set of open and end square brackets around both values. They're still going to have quotes, and they'll be separated by a comma. So if I have beef and yak, it's open square bracket, quotation mark, beef, quotation mark, comma, quotation mark, yak, quotation mark, end square bracket. Like I said, took me 5-10 minutes to figure that one out. Maybe even took a little bit longer. It's not well documented, but I did find some help on some chat boards and was able to finally figure out how to structure that. And once I got over that hump, implementing the rest of the things was much, much easier. So my flow that I created for this had a bunch of if-then statements, right? And I started off with if the product title contains yak and beef, then set the meta value to yak and beef. Now, if it didn't have both yak and beef, then I had it search for if it contained beef. And if it didn't, then if it contained yak. And if it didn't, then if it contained lamb. And for each one, if it did contain that value, we set the meta field value to that text string. Now, I don't have any products that had beef, yak, and lamb in the title, nor did I have any with lamb and yak or lamb and beef. But if that did exist, I would have to add that to my flow and all these logic conditions that I have, these if-then statements that I'm building out. So flow can take a little bit of time to figure out, and to figure out the logic you have to do and the order that you do them in. For example, in my flow, I had to search for beef and yak before I searched for just beef or just yak. Because if I searched for just beef first, even if it contained beef and yak, it would say yes, it would set the value to beef, and would be done. So it might take you a little bit of testing to get it all figured out and all structured. But this is a really nice way to automate setting those meta field values. Now, I did that in an existing catalog, but I also am going to use this flow in the future as we add new products to the store. So when the store staff adds a new product, beef whatever, that'll go through this flow once to make that product active and will automatically set that meta field value. So you can set up flows for all of your different data elements that you're storing inside of these meta fields. Now, when I'm defining a product taxonomy, like saying we're going to classify meat and we're going to have it either be beef or yak or lamb, I don't want to do that in 3 different places at 3 different times. Now, we are putting it in the product title and in the meta field, so we're kind of doing it twice there, and I'm okay with that because one of them is used for the customer and one is used in Shopify as presenting the information to the customer. So what I mean by that is I don't like having a tag of beef and a meta field of beef. And I used to have to do that because you weren't allowed to create a collection based on meta field values. But now we can actually create collections based on meta field values. And that allows us to say, all right, in our taxonomy, we're going to define beef as one of the things we're looking at, and it's going to be defined in the meta field, and we're not going to have it in the tag, we're not going to have it in the product type, it's just going to be in this meta field. So the way we do that now is in our Shopify admin, right? We go to settings, back to where we were looking at the custom data element in settings where meta fields are stored. And if you open up your meta field definition for, in my case, meat, I have a couple checkboxes on the screen now. One of those checkboxes is use as filter in admin, which allows you in the Shopify admin, when you're looking at a list of products, you could say, show me all the products whose meta field is set to beef, which is nice. And then also, there's another checkbox for use in automated collections. And that allows you, when you're setting up your collections, to use the meta field value, right? In the past, you weren't allowed to do that. You would have things like if the product type equals beef or if the tag contains beef. But now you can say if the meta field value contains beef and define your collections dynamically that way. So if you go into collections and create a new collection, and I always make my collections dynamic or automated, right? In your drop-down menu for the conditions, you now have at the bottom any meta fields who you've defined those meta fields and then check the box to allow them in your dynamic collections. You have that meta field there, and you can select it, and you can use the entries. And the nice thing is, if you have the meta field like we have in this situation where it's predefined to be just beef, just yak, or just lamb, or a combination of those, the Shopify admin knows that information and presents it on the collection page. So you don't just type in beef because you might get capitalization wrong or spelling wrong, those kind of things. It just gives you a drop-down menu. You could select the value that you want to use for this collection. So it really makes it easy for you to not make mistakes because it's so easy to make mistakes with spelling and things like that. So once you pull all these pieces together, you now have a much more easy and powerful way to display filters on your collection pages and on your search result pages than you were able to do in the past. So let's do a little quick summary of the steps of what you're doing. The first thing you're going to want to do is add 2 new apps to your store if you don't already have them in there. And that's the Search and Discovery app and the Shopify Flow app. Both those are developed by Shopify and they're free in the App Store. And then you're going to define your taxonomy to decide what you want your filters to be. Now, some of your filters, like if you have a product type filter, you're going to use the value of product type in your products. That can be part of your taxonomy. But where you used to use tags a lot, think about replacing those with meta fields. And meta fields are set in your settings under custom data. So you'll define your meta fields, and when you can, make those meta fields a drop-down menu of options for your store staff. So they're not just typing in any value they want. And this way you can define and enforce your options that are allowed for that level of your data. Then you want to go into your Shopify admin again and go into your theme and make sure that you've got faceted filtering turned on, which is going to look to that Shopify Search and Discovery app to determine what filters to present. And then you'll go into your Shopify Search and Discovery app and you'll set up the filters that you want using those meta field values that you've defined, or if you're using other data elements like product type, you can also add those in there for your filters. And now that you've got these meta field definitions for these values that you're using, you can also use those meta field definitions as you set up your collections so that you're only storing that information about the product in one place so you can keep that consistency going throughout. And I think now that we're at this inflection point with the Shopify store experience for store staff, that small stores can now have this rich browse experience with filters that they weren't able to do in the past without paying for an app and doing a little bit more complex of a setup process. Now, this setup process that I just walked you through, it's not defined in one place for you. And that's why I brought it together in this podcast episode. So, you've got a couple different apps that you're using for different reasons. You've got different settings at different places inside the Shopify admin. But hopefully this gives you that overview on how all those things work together to bring to your customers powerful filters like this. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast with Scott Austin. This podcast is brought to you by Jade Puma, a Shopify-focused agency located in San Diego, California. If you like what you heard, please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast.